Hello everyone, welcome. I noticed on Meetup that there was a fairly high proportion of RSVPs from people that haven't been to one of these sessions before. So just wondering, can I get a quick show of hands if this is your first AWS User Group? Excellent. Welcome.
This week, yeah.
So there are several ways, if you're new, to stay in touch with us. Obviously, you've signed up with the Meetup group. That's a pretty good start. If you hit awsugperth.au, that's the website, Google it. There'll be links there to our YouTube channel. We do record all our sessions, so you can come back on them later. There's also a Slack channel, which is a little undercooked at the moment, so it'd be great if we could get a few more people on there and actually see a bit of activity sort of outside of our Meetup sessions. So yeah, just check the website and have a look at our other channels. Did anyone go to latency? Woo! Nice. Did anyone come to the alien attack workshop? Nice. A few organisers threw their hands up there. So thank you for coming, if you did. If you didn't, and you weren't aware, Alien Attack was a hands-on serverless workshop. Second time that we've run that. We're looking at doing more workshops. Currently, I think our front runner in terms of subject matter is probably CDK, something a bit hands-on around CDK.
We also are looking at candidate generative AI if people are interested.
Let's do a quick straw poll on that. Who would rather spend a few hours getting their hands dirty with CDK versus something generative AI? Ooh, nice. I think we have it. That said, I think we might have stacked the numbers given the subject matter tonight. That's great. James Vulling, one of the hard-working organisers of this group, is going to present to us today on CDK. Is this your first presentation in Perth since you?
Yeah.
Okay. So please put your hands together. Welcome, James.
Cool, thanks, Matt. Am I right, audio-wise, up the back if I talk like this? Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry. Cool. So this session today, it's an introductory session, not going to be too hardcore, hopefully, but want to give you a broad overview of CDK, some of the benefits that it offers, and at the end there, do a bit of a demo and see how some of the things come together, just so you get a bit familiar with the tools and also some related tools. So yeah, I was keen to understand at currently, who knows a bit about CDK, who's used CDK, yeah? Keep your hand up if you're managing apps in prod already, right now, yeah? Keep your hand up if you should be up here instead of me. Okay, cool. So I've been kind of, not working hands-on with CDK, but I first got involved, or sort of had my first exposure to it in end of 2018, 2019. So, and I really liked it straight away, and I think it filled a lot of gaps for me with pain points that I'd seen in approaches that I'd been using prior to that, and so hence why I wanted to share with you some of that experience today. So this guy here is the CDK Otter. I'm not sure if he's official or not. He's on some kind of a CDK account. He's got a stack of pancakes, so stack is the key word there, and so that's why he's relevant. Eric Johnson, one of the developer advocates at AWS, tends to spruik the Otter, but he's going to show up when there's a superpower for CDK. So when he's on the corner there, down the bottom right, like there's a superpower call out. So just keep an eye out for him. So who am I? Yeah, my name's James. I moved over to Perth last year from Melbourne. I've been coming here for about 10 years because my wife grew up here and has now managed to convert me to the good side. And so enjoying my new life in Perth with our young family. I've been in technology leadership roles for a little over 15 years with places like the AFL and News Corp. Prior to my current role, I was a CTO at a business called PlayHQ and then a buy now, pay later called OpenPay. And I'm currently a principal consultant at an AWS partner called CMD. And it's that middle row that's relevant to the CDK where I was the founding CTO at this business called PlayHQ, which was looking to create a startup in the sports administration space, so grassroots sports and organising grassroots sports. And we had no hires, and we were thinking about who we should hire and how do we make that decision when we've got no technology at all. We could go in any kind of direction. And what I started thinking about is, how could I frame that decision around, skill sets that are relevant to what we think we're going to build, but also in terms of being able to attract talent, maintainability, and all of those types of things. And so started looking at, and productivity, right? So which languages or software languages and platforms would be productive for us to build on. And for me, with my experience as a cloud provider, AWS was a bit of a not really a question too hard, given the number of years that I've been working with AWS. But the other one around software languages was a bit more open, and I decided to go towards JavaScript and then specifically TypeScript, which was quite popular in that time frame, and I could see that it was continuing to grow in terms of popularity. So we thought, what if we hired front-end and back-end engineers that were developing using TypeScript and then compiling down to their respective platforms? Then we did that. So we just sort of looked for TypeScript people with AWS experience and hired our first half dozen engineers and started building this platform. And then when we wanted to get our first full-time cloud engineer or systems person, we'd heard about CDK, and CDK's kind of natively was TypeScript, and we're like, well, that's a really interesting coincidence. And so we kind of doubled down on TypeScript. And this really interesting thing happened where our cloud engineer was predominantly working in TypeScript, but so were all of the devs. And what we started to find is that they had more reasons to talk to each other. I mean, we were small to begin with, right? So it wasn't like we were a large enterprise and there were lots of teams all doing different things all over the place. But we had teams upskilling on TypeScript, or people upskilling on TypeScript across the board, and reviewing each other's code and trying to help them get better at it, reviewing each other's PRs, contributing pull requests, front end working on the cloud side, and vice versa. And I thought that was a really cool thing to see, the software across the full stack. And so that was kind of the genesis for my journey with CDK, and then that continued with OpenPay, where we started to move from native cloud formation and into CDK. So if we go back a bit further, mid-2000s, there's this kind of moment there where, in my view at least, people started moving from manually doing things to kind of script-based approaches, and then things like scripting at bulk, like Capistrano or any of those types of things, where people were using those to issue commands across fleets of servers. But then this kind of next step happened around configuration management. And in my view, that's kind of like the precursor for what's become known as infrastructure as code. So we had things in the mid-2000s, like Puppet, I think was probably first, and then Chef was a fast follow. And then kind of in a similar line, Ansible came out a little bit later. They're kind of slightly different, using different language formats and different DSLs to achieve what they were trying to do, but they were really trying to mostly configure servers and keep the configuration in a known state. I think the big shift there was the move from imperative style approaches, so do this, now do this, and now do this, to declarative, where this is what I want the picture to look like, go and make it so. So Puppet was probably the first one that was doing that, and is still doing a good job of that today. But in these kind of, I'll call it BC times, right? So BC in AWS is before console, before CLI. And AWS is sort of starting to realize that they're onto something. You know, all of this stuff is sort of starting to come together. And so AWS first had their crack at this in 2011 with the launch of CloudFormation. And we'll talk a little bit more about CloudFormation because it is important to CDK for those who are already using it. And then we have some other competitors in the space come out. So in 2014, Terraform, taking a different approach. So Terraform, writing code using its own unique syntax, HCL, the HashiCorp configuration language, and then interacting directly with AWS service APIs to get the job done. But then AWS does this thing where they have a couple more cracks at how they should approach infrastructure as code and developer productivity. And so they launch SAM first, the serverless application model, and then quickly after that they launch CDK. I think there's a kind of a distinction there that the serverless one in the name, it's more geared towards that sort of thing, whereas CDK can basically do anything that CloudFormation can do. And so kind of has this superset of stuff that it can do, and I think that's a really powerful thing. And then not to sort of, to kind of finish off the story, Pulumi, I think, as another kind of more recent addition to that, having another kind of interesting journey in and of itself. I'd be keen to know, are there other infrastructure as code approaches that people are using that I haven't kind of mentioned there that are common? No?
Shell scripts for CLI.
Yes, way to go. That'd be keeping you busy, wouldn't it? Oh, James, how are you? Yeah?
Way back, or FAI?
Yeah, okay. But currently?
Not anymore.
No, not anymore. Yeah. Yeah, cool. And so a little bit more about CloudFormation. I assume that given the audience, most of you are at least vaguely familiar with it, but just in case, CloudFormation is a service from AWS which basically orchestrates the provision of infrastructure on your behalf. It does that by allowing you to define your resources in a unit, which then, when it's provisioned, becomes called a stack. The definition of those resources is done using JSON or YAML syntax, and the specific syntax for CloudFormation has these 7 or 8 different blocks, so resources, parameters, mappings, rules. It allows you to spin up stacks and tear them down pretty quickly, pretty consistently, and CloudFormation does a lot of the heavy lifting there around managing dependencies. So component A depends on component B, so we need to create that first, and then when that's done, we'll create the second one. The fact that you've got this kind of manifest means that you know the state of truth for your deployed infrastructure. And then it has some other nice features there, like change sets, so the ability to kind of effectively run a dry run and then say whether you'd like that to actually take effect, and then also drift configuration. So once you've configured a whole bunch of resources, have my resources being changed or modified, and bring that to my attention so that I can kind of remedy that. Because what I don't want if I'm defining things as code is for someone to log in and start modifying the configuration of my system, and then I don't know what the state of that is anymore. So those are some nice features for CloudFormation. And CloudFormation hasn't been without its issues, right? It's can be a little bit difficult to on a cycle time basis. So I make a change and I want to see the impact of that, or if I have something wrong in my code, it can be a little bit clunky to debug. I don't think there's any escaping that. Obtuse kind of error messages, so an error message that comes back but it's not really meaningful to you in the context of what you were trying to do. But it has gotten a lot better, I think, and it's definitely a very robust service in my view. I think the other thing that it was historically a bit of a problem was that it was a little bit slow, when features were launched, for CloudFormation to adopt support for those. And I've heard that basically the CloudFormation team would get this long list of requests from lots of different AWS teams that were trying to do stuff, and they'd be like, which ones are we going to action first? And now they've kind of flipped that model and made that more a service team problem, so that the service teams can create the CloudFormation parts that are needed, and so features tend to launch with CloudFormation support, which is great. So, you know, you get the choice of using JSON or YAML to manage your CloudFormation, which is great, right? It's code-like, I would say, in that it's text-based. I can use source control. Because of that, I can send it to my teammate and they can review it before it becomes gospel. I also get the benefits of the CloudFormation service that I sort of touched on before, around being able to use their tools to provision my infrastructure, being able to say the state that I want it. So, you know, if we wanted 10 instances, it's not like once I've created one, I say I want 9 more. I just say I want 10, and it will go and make the 10. But if you're dealing with like a more significant real-world application, you can end up with lots and lots of resources, and so these configuration files tend to get pretty big. And so when you're scanning through, you know, 500 or 1,000 lines of JSON or YAML, like it's enough to make your eyes bleed. And I've had more than one stack where I've been working, and I've had kind of similarly configured things, but with slightly different names, and you kind of lose track of where you are in the CloudFormation document. So, you're like, you know, one was like a consumer side and an administrator side. Am I in the admin part or the consumer part? And because I wanted them to actually be managed together in lockstep, but you know, you'd sort of get lost within this one large file. But it's not really code, like it's code-like, but you can't use, I mean, it has some kind of conditionals, but they're a bit clunky. It doesn't have loops, doesn't have composition, doesn't have inheritance, doesn't have abstractions, all the things that like software teams are used to using. And so, and also if it's code, like shouldn't I be able to test it? Shouldn't I be able to write unit tests and assertions and actually understand like this, that what I'm gonna get is what I want? Yeah, and so like Gregor Hope, who's actually now at AWS, gave a talk, and he called it infrastructure as actual code, and I think actual code is like a good way of looking at it. So like CloudFormation shares some properties of code, and it's kind of code-like. Like I think I share a view with Gregor that it's not actual code in the way that I would like to work with it. And so in 2018, AWS launched this other thing, Cloud Development Kit, the CDK, and that leverages the good things about CloudFormation, but takes it a step further and allows you to write actual code to define your infrastructure. This is superpower number one, right? Like you're writing real code, and you get all the benefits of that real code. And so that's modularity, reuse, testability, syntax highlighting and other nice things to autocomplete and whatnot to help you along the way. So superpower number one, we're writing actual code. Now CDK, there's 3 major parts to it. There's the core framework, there's the construct library, and the command line interface. We're going to touch on all these. But effectively, the core framework is the abstractions that you work with when you're dealing with a CDK application. The construct library is effectively a spec of constructs that have been written that you can use in your application and compose to define your infrastructure. And then the CLI for interacting with your CDK application, and then ultimately with the CloudFormation service. So we'll touch more on the interplay between CDK and CloudFormation in just a sec. So I talked about it like we're writing actual code, but I didn't say we're actually writing code in like whatever language happens to be your favorite, assuming your favorite is like one of those 6, which I think is a lot of people, right? Like they're kind of the go-tos that you tend to see. Python, TypeScript, that covers a lot of teams in my view. And so this is superpower number 2. Like it's the language of your choice. So when I talked about when I was at OpenPay, I had a regular software engineering team building apps and APIs, and I had a data engineering team, and we all used CDK, but the data engineering team was more Python focused. So that's what they did, but all the other teams were using TypeScript. And so we still had that like common approach in style, but in a way that was like unique to them, or being able to take advantage of the tools and the language things that they were familiar with, rather than them having to bend the way they work for the tool. So AWS has achieved this not by writing CDK in these 6 languages. They've kind of innovated and built this JSII, it's called, and it's an open source project which allows code in any language to interact with JavaScript classes. And so it allows the class library for TypeScript to be used in to then compile down, transpile down. And so you can have a look at JSII there. And incidentally, this is what like Pulumi launched in 2018, just with Python, I think. And then in 2020, they've now launched these same languages. The reason they've got these same languages is because of JSII. And so Pulumi is leveraging this, and it's leveraging a bunch of Terraform to get the job done, right, in a way that they want to do. And also, it's like CDK TF. So for people who are familiar with the CDK Terraform project, this is also how they achieve that. So yeah, so superpower number 2, you can write CDK in any of these 6 languages, which I think covers the vast majority that teams are using in industry. So working through the building blocks that you work with CDK, we have these kind of 3 levels of abstraction, the app, the stack, and the construct. The best way to think about it is that the app is a container for one or more stacks. And within the boundaries of an app, stacks can easily refer to other resources and their attributes. So you can kind of get this like nice interplay between those. And then stacks are the unit of deployment in CDK. So it's like almost identical to how the CloudFormation service works with stacks. So very much analogous to that. And then constructs are the building blocks or the Lego blocks that you're actually using to define your application. And so those constructs could be one resource, like a S3 bucket or a CloudFront distribution, but it could be also multiple resources that kind of work well together, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a sec. And now down the bottom here, like there's these other like squiggly arrows and stuff. What's going on here? So what happens is we write our code in the CDK framework in one of those 6 languages, but when we hit go, which is actually CDK synth, what we get is actually a CloudFormation template that can be consumed by the CloudFormation service to bring all of that to life. So I write code locally, and then there's this crossover where the code transpiles into CloudFormation syntax. And then from there on, I'm relying on the CloudFormation service, which is, tried and tested, right? Like it's 12 years in or something like that. What did I say, 2011? And we're leveraging all of that to get my my application into a known state. Does that make sense, roughly? Yeah. Look, one of the main differences here is the CloudFormation you get out of CDK is probably not the way you would write it. It's not the most user-friendly, but it's there and it's defined and it gives you the resources and the outputs and all the other things that you're used to on the CloudFormation side when you're consuming those. Can't actually see my speaker notes fully. Superpower number 3, you get all the benefits of CloudFormation for the last part of the job. So constructs. There are 3 levels in this hierarchy, like this level, these abstractions. So level 1 is basically a raw CloudFormation resource, which means that you end up having to define all of the necessary parameters and whatnot to achieve what you're trying to do. Then there's level 2 and level 3, which which kind of move up in terms of the more high-level abstractions. So in the level 2s, AWS is publishing these higher level resources which allow you to implement sensible defaults and have these convenience methods to be able to write less code to get the job done in a way that makes sense. In level 3, you get these opinionated patterns to complete common tasks. So if you think about, let's say, a static web app, it might be a CDN using CloudFront and an S3 bucket, and there's going to be some roles and whatnot to make all of that work. I could say that I want my new static web app, and it creates all of that, and I just point it to where my source code is, and off it goes. And you could do that in a few lines of code rather than going through and having to think about all the resources and how they all link up to be able to get that done. We've got 2 otters. So the first order is that like AWS is publishing this stuff and you can use it and you get the benefit of that. But the other order is that your team can do the same thing, right? So if you're working somewhere and you have standards, then you could take some high-level construct and make an internal version of that yourselves and manage that like you would any other code, like as a versioned artifact, and include that into projects. You know, if you had standards, compliance goals, if there were common things that you're doing commonly, then you can kind of stand on the work that's been done by someone rather than grabbing a whole bunch of cloud formation and then plonking that. You know, you get to just include the dependency, configure it for the new app, and away you go. So hopefully that makes sense, conceptually at least. The CLI. So I'm not going to talk about the spec too much right now. That was the second part, the second of the 3 chunks. But the CLI is there to support your development lifecycle. So just kind of trying to map it back to like a regular process of local development, build and deploy. We've got a bunch of commands that we can use here, like CDK init to initialize our project, deploy. So you know, we might have dev, test and stage and prod environments for what I'm working on, but I want to look at my code working on an environment on the side, so I could provision my own environment and work against that for the day, the week, whatever it might be. And then CDK watch allowing me to monitor the files in my local and then have those sync to a stack that's in my account, right? So that if I change my Lambda handler, it gets deployed. If I change my some property of my function, then that gets deployed as well, right? And so it's going in there and trying to give you that fast feedback during the development cycle. I've got 2 other things here in brackets at the bottom. SAM, so the serverless application model. There's now this kind of overlap between SAM and CDK, where you know they both stand on top of CloudFormation. They've done some stuff to try and integrate those a little bit, which you know, around like local testing, local development support, which I think are quite neat. And then like unit testing tools, like you can use those to ensure that your infrastructure you know, does what it should and isn't deviating from like what you want as a desired property of it. The synth is the build step. So that's what I said before, taking your CDK application code and then transpiling that into CloudFormation, which is then what actually gets consumed by the CloudFormation service. Okay, now on the right-hand side, we've got Bootstrap, diff, deploy, and destroy. Bootstrap is used to create a CloudFormation stack in your account, which has the necessary resources so that you can then go and deploy the CDK application in full. So think about the IAM, identity and access management roles that it needs, S3 buckets, ECR, like container repository for some applications. Those things are relevant and useful, and they help get the application into that same target account. A diff, so for those who are familiar with, I don't know, command line diff tools or browser diff tools, IDE diff tools, you can make changes locally and then diff that against what's running on AWS, and it will tell you what's actually going to change if you promote what you've just done. And so it's kind of like less than a dry run, I guess, in that sense. So it's just going to it's a precursor to that. It's going to tell you what's about to be modified if you do promote those changes. Deploy we've touched on, and destroy to tear down your stack. Have I missed anything? No, I don't think so. So far, you with me? We going all right? Yeah. Okay. Hopefully, it will make sense if we get good demo time. Now, so that's why I'm trying to press on. So aspects. Aspects can apply an operation to all the constructs in your application. So effectively, they can also be used to modify or verify those constructs. So during the build phase, it walks the tree to have a look at all the constructs that are in the application, and you can write code that actually checks for attributes on different types of things. So I've got an example here, but at the top we've got the interface that you need to conform to, and then down here we've got an example that's checking that an S3 bucket has versioning enabled. And so you can error if it doesn't, or you could change it so that it does. So another example might be that you want all EBS volumes to be encrypted, or lots of stuff to be encrypted, but like error out if it's not, because we want to mandate that. And then going a bit further than that, like and building on aspects, is NAG. So there is a CloudFormation version of this called CFN NAG. This is the CDK version, CDK NAG. You kind of get the point. And NAG is really there to validate that the state of your constructs within a given scope comply with a given set of rules. And so there are NAG packs available for lots of different compliance regimes, some of the common ones up there. But also you could develop these as an internal thing for your organisation, right? So if you had standards, you could codify those standards and say that all CDK projects need to have the NAG pack for Acme Inc. As part of that, and so therefore nothing will get deployed unless it's conformant with our NAG pack. Now this directly relates to the aspects. So aspects is being used to enable all of this, and also, you know, if you wanted to go and create your own NAG pack. Has anyone used that? Sean has? Yeah? Yeah, cool. Okay. Escape hatches let you break out of constructs. So in this, we've got two examples here. One's an escaping and one's an unescaping. So in this one, we're actually moving from a level 2 resource and then saying that we actually want the raw CFN resource, and then we're just going to check that a specific CloudFormation property is set on that. So we're actually moving from a layer 2 resource down to a layer 1 resource. So with me on that? And now that might be useful if, let's say you were using a layer 2 construct and then a service announced a change, and that's not yet part of that layer 2 construct, but it's part of the layer 1 one. So this allows you the ability to go back and turn that on until such time as hopefully the layer 2 one picks up support for that. So that can be a bit of a useful workaround in that case. And then unescaping, so this is the opposite direction. We're actually moving up the stack. So we've got a layer 1 resource here, the regular CFN bucket. But we don't want to deal with the guff around permissions, and we want to use the standardized ones. So we can say we're going to create a layer 2 resource from our layer 1 resource, and then we're just going to grant read and write access to this group that was already defined. So far, so good. So kind of letting you leverage those convenience methods on the higher order abstractions, so you don't have to do all of that heavy lifting. And then CDK pipelines. So pipelines can be used for continuous delivery of CDK applications. So these are opinionated constructs. It's written in CDK. So it's like a big inception cycle there where you write CDK to deploy your CDK. It's built for CDK apps. It's not for like, I've got some generic deploy process, copying code around and doing a bunch of other stuff. So, you know, I wouldn't try and use this for your arbitrary sort of deployment pipelines. It supports all the things that pipelines supports as source. So that includes like GitHub, Bitbucket, code commit, S3, and container repository. And it's self-mutating, right? So in this pipeline, this is kind of like what it looks like by default. You start defining stages, and your stages could represent, let's say, a development environment which has a stack for the database and a stack for the web app. And then I could have a different stage for QA and a different stage for staging and prod or whatever. And as you make changes to the definition of those stages, the pipeline will update itself to make sure that it's always doing what it says it should do in the code. So that's what I mean by self-mutating. It's kind of like managing its own evolution based on what you've defined in code. Does that make sense conceptually? Yeah? Bit of a mind shift, that one. Okay. Whew. All right. Demo time. So we're going to build a simple thing. You know, a pretty stock standard sort of thing. The idea is really just to show you some of the tools so that you see them working and in action, and point out a few things along the way. We're going to create this stack here. with several constructs in it, so an API gateway, a Lambda function, Dynamo. I'm going to skip over stuff. There's it's not going to be prod ready. That's not the goal. The goal is to show you the CDK CLI and a few other things along the way, just so that if you go back to what you do during the day and you want to have a go at this sort of stuff, it feels a bit familiar. So far, so good. Makes sense? I've got my cheat notes here too, just in case I lose my trail of thought and everything goes a bit pear-shaped. I'm going to have a drink and because it's night and software developers at night need beer, is that right? Mirror. Whew. So while I'm here on two kind of stools, we'll see. Can you see what I see? Is that legible? That's probably about as big as I'm going to be able to go with allowing some space for a code editor and a command line. Yep. Thumbs up from the back. Cool. Okay, so the first thing was to initialize the project. So we can. So what have I got installed? So apart from VS Code and some plugins, which I can't even see anymore because they're the screen's pumped up. I've got CDK installed using Brew and SAM installed and Docker for the actual build. So we can run CDK init. Now it's giving us these different options. So I can create an application, which is kind of like the normal path, but I could create a lib. So that what I was talking about before about creating potentially an internal library of constructs for your organization. That's how you'd go about that. And then there's these sample apps. So you can go and have a look at these different sample apps that exist in these different F#. There you go. In these different languages and knock yourself out. So I'm going to say CDK init, and I'm going to say thank you. Do I sound like I need it? Language equals TypeScript. So that was an empty directory 1 second ago, and now we've got a fairly kind of normal TypeScript application structure. It's still doing stuff. Hopefully that means I'm online. But you know, NPM likes to download half the internet, so good times. What we should be able to see is our lib folder, which contains our stack definitions. So your application might have multiple stacks. You're going to end up with different stacks depending on how you want to name those. And then the bin folder is the application itself, defined using CDK. Okay, so this process is finished. It's giving me this notice here. I can actually say that I want to acknowledge the notice, which is, I don't know, telling me something about 25714. I don't know, something about a version change. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I did that by acknowledging it. And that's interesting. It's like put it in this context file. So this context file actually helps to maintain state in your application. Should be part of your source code. And it's handy because it's trying to ensure consistency of your application. So if you were tying your app to a specific AMI and then a new version of that AMI came out, this would pin you back to the previous version of that, potentially, depending on how you want to use it, right? And so it also looks at things like the availability zones that exist within a region. And so if those AZs changed, which happens, your application would still be deployed consistently based on when you wrote it, not based on AWS changing things and then that having some weird side effects for you. So that's the context file, okay? And so, like a good TDD person, we can write our test before we write our code, right? So we could say that we're going to, I've just opened up like this demo test file that it's automatically created for me. I'm going to take that out and then I'm going to make sure that my Lambda runtime is correct. And then it's got these, it's going to instantiate an app, it's going to instantiate the stack within that, and then it's got this template that it's referring to, and the template is really talking about the CloudFormation that's being generated. And there are matches and abilities to assert things on the template as a result of that. And so we're going to kind of work from the inside out on the architecture you saw before. We're going to start with the Lambda, go out to the API gateway, and then the database. So I'm going to say, yeah, I actually want to make sure that I've got a resource that's a Lambda function, and I want to make sure that its runtime is, do that? Oh, sorry. Is Node.js 18.x. Cool. So I'm going to run npm. Did I get a screen back? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so I got one failed test because I got no Lambda. That makes sense. So I'm going to come up here. How am I going for time? Yeah, okay, I think we're all right.
We run out of beer.
That's a crime. Actually, I need to import the install types. AWS Lambda. So I'm just importing some types that I need to write my Lambda. I knew this would be kind of the boring part where I'm typing, and wasn't sure if I should cheat and like have source code ready or just deal with the awkwardness. So here we are. So my handler. So really, like, we're just going to mock this out, right? So it's going to receive an event. It's going to be return a promise for an API gateway proxy result. And we're just going to return a static value because we don't need to do anything more than that. So I'm going to return a status code of 200, and I'm going to return a body of, but we'll make it kind of look like an API, right? ID 1234 and a username, and it's Jane Doe. Does that look all right? No errors? Don't have Aiden yelling at me, so it's good. Now we can run our test again. We didn't define it, so we can come up here, and so now we've got a Lambda like written. We need to define it in our stack, and so I can import star as Node.js from AWS CDK lib. And so what we've got here is a class, just out of the box, that is called demo stack. Could call that whatever I want. It extends the CDK stack, and it's got this constructor method, which is asking about the scope for my construct, an ID, so that will generally form part of the resource name when it's automatically generated, and then any props that I want to pass to the stack. And so this is a pretty common thing you'll see a lot in CDK, is this scope ID props, scope ID props, scope ID props. So we've added this support now for AWS Lambda Node, and we're going to say that we want to create a constant Lambda function, and it equals a new Node.js function. And now we're in our first version of that, like scope ID props, right? So it's this, and it's my Lambda function and my props. So what am I passing to that? So my, just gone blank. So first of all, like, where's my entry path? Yes. Path.result. Where's my file? So, sorry, there's pop-ups coming up. That's really annoying when you're trying to show people. Source and lambda.ts, is that what's behind there? No. I want to define my runtime, so it's on the HDMI here. That's wrong. Thanks. We said 18 before, I think, and then the handler function is handler, which I think might be default anyway. Okay. So that's it. Like, we've created a Lambda function referred to our other, oh, that's not good.
So in the test, it needs to be lambda.runtime.js 18.x.
What's happened, sorry?
Saying that the runtime is an enum
In here?
in the lambda. So the runtime is an enum, and you need to use that same enum in the test.
Yeah, I could use a string version of it, right?
Yeah, so you just need to double check it's the same.
Yeah, okay. But it would have said expected value. I think it's.
For the same workspace, there's no CDK-demo.
Say it again?
There's no, if you scroll up in your console, in the console output, the terminal,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
GAV/workspace/src, is there meant to be workspace/CDK-demo?
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
I think it just needs to be one dot.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah.
Testing for attention by the crowd.
Nice work. Cool, thanks, Matt. So, lost my train of thought. So we've now got a passing test. So we can CDK synth that, right? So, and what we'll see is this CDK out directory has appeared, and it's just populated a whole bunch of things. So in here we've got the CDK template that's resulting. So if we have a look at that, it's like, we're not going to read it, but you can see it's doing things with Lambda. It's got the actual function defined here and where it's going to get the source from. It's got roles. But like, if you just have a look, it's down at like 325 lines and we haven't really done much yet. An empty CDK project, I think, is already at like 100 and something lines. So we've added on another 200, but we wrote poorly. We wrote poorly, 4 lines of code or something like that. The other thing we've got is this asset, right? So it's compiled the, should have compiled the Lambda ready to go. So why is that empty? Wondering if I've still got internet. Yeah. And so this is using Docker to do the build at the moment. If you've got ES build, enabled in the project. It'll use ES Build, which tends to be a lot faster. Is that actually building? It's weird. Okay, nonetheless. That's worrying, but we'll see what happens. So we can go back to our demo stack and look to enable the API gateway over the front. So start as API gateway from AWS CDK lib, AWS API gateway. So this is using kind of like the I don't know, the current version of API Gateway. There are new constructs under development at the moment. I think they're still marked as alpha, so they've got like more of a kind of a fluent way of defining the API gateways, but probably not prod ready given the alpha notation. So, but it's promising that there will be something that's like a little bit easier to use, especially when you're defining multiple routes. An API with like lots of different routes on it looks a bit cumbersome at the moment. So if we say we want our API gateway, and we're going to say we want a new API, no, we want a new Lambda REST API, and we want this context, and it's our REST API, and then our params, and we just want our handler for that to be our Lambda function. Okay. So we should be able to run that and bootstrap our AWS account and then deploy it. So if we have a look over here at the AWS plugin, I don't have any stacks here already. Like these just relate to Control Tower. So if I say CDK bootstrap, it should then ask me, and then demo gods are not with me. Okay. Need to copy an ID.
Everyone look away.
Sorry?
Everyone look away.
Yeah. Oh, that's all right. 048438. I shouldn't need to do that. I think something's happened with the.
You can use environment variables here.
Yeah, but I think they were already configured, so I'm not sure why it's not picking them up already. Like just in my local.
Do like a print env. Have a look what's there. If you wanted to look at what's in the environment variables.
Yeah.
Or you just use the profiling extension. Is it through?
Yeah.
this code? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to live up. Like we're coming up for an hour already.
It's process.env.
Yeah.
.cdk underscore default underscore account and CDK underscore default underscore region in capitals.
So as you were, but then using the environment variables.
Let's just have a look at this. I just can't remember the exact way to pass it into the.
Just try those.
Yeah, I don't know that I have them handy.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So I should be able to go here.
Yeah, those ones.
So it comes now, 115, I think.
Oh, is it? Oh, nice. Hmm. All right, 04. I'm worried it's actually just logged out or something.
Yeah, logged in, your credentials not expired.
All right, maybe I'll undo that while I. Should be like, yeah, maybe it's just timed out my session in here.
Just while James is sorting some of that stuff out, does anyone here use dev containers? So, yeah, for those that don't, it's a way of, rather than using Docker to run a build, you're actually running the whole development environment inside VS Code inside a container, which is pretty darn nifty for making sure your environment is precisely the same way every time. I'm sure there's others out there, but I've written a Docker file called AWS CDK dev container, right, which has all of the dependencies, because there's quite a few Python and TypeScript dependencies that you need to run CDK. It can be a bit of a pain to set up from scratch. So I can post that link up later, because it's a way of just pointing at a dev container and having the whole environment ready with AWS command line completion and SSO support and all the bells and whistles.
I was going to say, just make sure you're going off RAM to run dev containers. But yeah, it's really, it's very
You're running a 486 or something.
I had 600 gig and I still need
You need to hit them up for an upgrade on your laptop. Yeah, so sorry, the credentials have just timed out, repopulated those, and now the bootstrap has gone through. Thanks for that handy distraction, Christian. So over here, we should, assuming these have carried through to here, we should see we've got a CDK toolkit stack, right? So the bootstrap has gone and created that for us. So now that our account is bootstrapped, we can effectively deploy our API gateway we should have and our one Lambda function, which is hooked up to that. This is going to go through CloudFormation, so it will take a little while it creates all the resources, but it's given me some feedback there about what it's actually going to create. It's asking for permission to create IAM resources, so it's letting you know that the permissions in your account will be different as a result of taking this action, and it's asking for your confirmation before you do that. And then here it's just giving you feedback, which is kind of like a summarized version of what you'd normally see in CloudFormation in the console anyway. So we'll let that do its thing for a minute or so, hopefully, not too long. And then what we should get back is a URL for the API gateway. We can call that, we can see our dummy data coming back, and we know that we're away. I was just going to show adding a nag pack and like showing you what that looks like. So if we come up to here, we can say aspects dot of this app, add a new PCI, where's it gone? Do I need to add it? Ah, my bad. Should add the dependency first, that would be useful. It's probably lucky that our stack just finished creating at the same time, so we can have a look at that. Not exciting, but we should have... Oh. If it's not your day, maybe it's not your day. No, I don't think so.
which is still a REST API, it just simplifies shit out of the one call.
Not sure about this.
Worst case, you go into the terminal and look at API gateway.
I think it might be, you know how we saw the built version here? I think it's to do with that. I think I'm stumped, to be honest, for now.
You can go into just in the console and have a look at API gateway if you want.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to have an empty Lambda function there to look at, which should be exciting.
Also, I think the assets are really per stack. You've only got one stack, so it might just be the main file that got generated, and then any subsequent stacks will go into the assets folder, I think.
The stack's hooked up, but
You just talked about superpowers again.
we run out of superpowers. I'm just now up here like floundering.
Superpowers,
Yeah.
okay, problem solving.
I'm not sure. That's not building. Maybe we need to look at the output back up here.
Does the handle need to be export comps?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, the demo gods. They've come for me.
Check your handler entry in your Lambda definition in the CDK.
In here, sorry?
The CDK
Oh, okay, right.
where you find the handler. So is it like handler.index or handler.index.handler or something?
Good one, Steve.
You usually have to do the file name and then the function name.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I think someone did call it right, actually. Not that. Someone get some AWS credits somewhere. Okay, so that's a different error, which is to be expected because we half did this. Whew, we're going to get there, peeps. I think. Okay, cool. Man. This is not for the faint of heart. Yeah. It's actually probably more audience participation than we've had in previous sessions, so I'm happy about that. All right, while that's going through another deploy, we'll go up here, we'll finish off this aspects with PCI support that we were fiddling around with. So new PCI, DSS, the checks. Now I wouldn't say you want to like just rely on this, right? Like you probably want to have thought about your solution enough to know that it should be PCI compliant before you start, not add this at the end and fix what happens. That would be a bad way to go. Guaranteed that this does not make you PCI compliant, so there's the big disclaimer. But what we've got here is now a printout of some errors here. So it's saying that the Lambda function's not in a VPC, you don't have a WAF attached to your API gateway, stuff that you would expect. So we'll take that away again. Did our deploy finish? Jane Doe. Jane Doe for the win. This is fun. Okay, good. All right, we're away. Now, CDK Watch, I said before, was allowing you to make changes locally and then see those reflect without, trying to get that fast feedback. I wouldn't say that it's the fastest because it's still provisioning real cloud resources, which I think is a better way to test because it's more realistic, but it is a bit slower than using dev containers, having local servers. But I do get all my cloud components, like I can use all of them. And then there is some neat stuff with SAM that allows you to kind of live in this hybrid world where you could write Lambdas or other things locally, and then use like a combination of cloud resources and local resources, so improving that cycle time again. But I'm happy to point someone at a video if there's any interest in seeing that. And it's Eric Johnson again that I mentioned before, old mate who's keen on the Otter. So we're now watching this. We don't, we want, Jane's got a middle name and it's A, and so that's going in. And it's detected a change to our Lambda, and it's just going straight out the door. So hopefully in a second that'll reflect, once Lambda does its thing. One of the things about CDK deploy is it uses this, there's a switch under there called hot swap. So if CDK can update your AWS resource without using CloudFormation, it'll do that because that's faster. So it'll just contact the service API directly and deploy it. But if it needs to work with CloudFormation, then it will do that as a fallback. So what that means is don't use this in any real environments. Like this is just for like local environment, your personal environment, or you and a colleague or whatever it is. Not for any kind of long-lived environments where you want to know the state, because you are going to get differences in environments for sure if you work in that way. So hey, Jane Doe is there in our API gateway, away we go. Yeah. What else do we want to do? So we haven't added the Dynamo, but I'm just conscious of time. I think we're probably up against it, so I might slow down there. I was going to kind of add that Dynamo and just show you how quickly you can add permissions to the Lambda to be able to access the Dynamo, but you kind of saw it on that unescaping slide where I was showing about some of those convenience methods. Just saves you from writing a whole IAM policy. Obviously you want to review what's coming out of it, make sure that it's fit for purpose, but if it gets you like the job done correctly, then happy days. The other part is SAM. So I've mentioned SAM a few times. You can actually work with SAM locally to invoke your API. So we could say SAM local invoke, and it's going to tell me I need to pass in a template file, right? So we'll pass that arg as CDK out CDK demo.template. I've only got one Lambda, so it goes, oh, you don't need to specify which Lambda because there's only one. So I'll just invoke that. It's going to run it up, and now we've got Jane A. Doe coming back. So we haven't deployed to the cloud, but we've got feedback, which is not too bad. And then further than that, we can actually SAM local start API, and now we've got a Go containers. Yeah. So we've got a localhost API gateway Lambda kind of a proxy, something that you can use to speed up your dev cycle there as well. So obviously if there are other resources you're dependent on, then your mileage might vary, but I think it's pretty handy tools, and if you can get it working in that hybrid mode as well, if anyone's keen, hit me up and I'll point you in the right video. But yeah, we'll call it a day there, I think. Thanks for your attention. I've got some resources here. I think the slides will get uploaded to Meetup after the fact, so and that's all good. I don't know if there's time for questions or not. And then I did want to do a shout out for this, if you weren't going to, Christian, so...
Oh, we were going to get there.
I'll leave it there.
Before we do, a couple of quick questions. One for me to start with. Does CDK work with Identity Center at AWS SSO?
You just saw CDK working with Identity Center and SSO? Right, there. So me interacting with CDK was, yeah.
I know there was an issue in the past with that happening.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of utilities to get around it, but it supports it now.
Yeah, so I've got my SSO credentials there in the file there. They just timed out like on a 60-minute thing, and that was the snafu. So yeah, that's working. Yep.
Great. Any questions, James?
Whoa. Start at the front here.
Yeah, have you tried ProGen?
I have not, no.
So ProGen is by the same development team as CDK, and it's an abstraction over things like package JSON. Like if you want to install a package, you tell ProGen.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Node.js.
Yep.
And it integrates with GitHub Actions and all this kind of stuff. So it gives you a lot of functionality out of the box. Yeah.
Are you finding that useful? That's good? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's with TypeScript or Node.js
I
projects?
think you pretty much use it with all the languages.
All the languages? Okay,
Maybe not
yeah.
all of them, maybe not C#, but the majority.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. Sorry, we had some others up here. Yeah, Steve?
Can you make an argument successfully for SAM? So if I can run all my code locally in IntelliJ or VS Code for my API or my Lambda, why would I run a Docker container to run code locally when I can do it already on my machine?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So
Why would I use SAM?
in that case, like I just did there,
Yeah, as opposed to if I could run my code locally in IntelliJ or VS Code already natively on my PC, why would I run a separate Docker container on my local PC if I can just run it right from the IDE?
yes, the first thing about SAM is it's an alternative to CDK altogether. So it has a whole raft of features that are not just what I showed there in 2 seconds. What I showed was kind of this coming together of CDK and SAM, where it's a CDK project, but SAM actually understands that and can still be used with that CDK project. SAM locally, I think that hybrid mode is really interesting. So if you were working in an event-driven architecture and you're using EventBridge, you're not going to be able to run that on your local machine. If you could write code that was pushing to that and have that execute locally but push to an EventBridge in the cloud, or on the receiving end or whatever, then I think that that's really interesting to boost your productivity, use the services that you're actually going to be deploying to, and do a whole bunch of things that you can't kind of do on your local. You know, people were using local stack in the past. I think most people spent more time messing around with trying to get local stack working than they actually spent like using local stack productively. And I think that like moving away from that is a good call until we could do that better than was happening. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that help answer?
Maybe I was a bit simpler. I was thinking like APIs and Lambdas, but you brought up other services that I did not think of.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And I think also the like IAM part of it as well is obviously different. So anywhere where you've got like permissions and whatnot, it's not really the real thing, right? So the closer you can get to that, the smoother it should be when you actually go into an upstream environment. Did you have a question too? Yeah.
So in your testing, you were checking the runtime for Lambda function.
Yep.
And you had only one Lambda function, so it always which one to test.
Yeah.
You have 2, 3, 5.
Yeah, there are matcher.
Which one to check?
Yeah, there are matcher methods to help with that, to narrow it down. So you can do that in a whole bunch of different ways. You can also apply things like universally. So instead of looking for one, you can say, I want to look for all. So yeah, there are a bunch of different parts. If you go to the CDK construct library, one of the top options there is assertions, and it's got all of the, before it starts going through all the AWS resources, it's right up the top. It's got all the gear there around how to do that. And so, you know, like in that example, we weren't, like normally you would test the application code. That's not what we were doing. We were leaving the, you know, the ID and the name and the Jane Doe out of it, and we were testing the actual infrastructure side. So, you know, I just chose the runtime as an example, but we could have been testing for a whole bunch of different properties that were core to the way our application needs to work and that we want to see that deployed. Yeah. Yeah, up the back.
Tools to help with the modernisation of cloud formation templates, say from layer 1 to 3.
So to take an existing cloud formation template and start to bring that.
For example, you might have an existing stack in AWS and you go, okay, I would like to take what's there and start to manage it.
Yeah.
Can I actually generate cloud formation template?
Yep.
That exists, but how can I start to migrate that through the layers?
Yeah.
Easy to maintain rather than manually creating.
I don't know about tools. I mean, I think there's strategies. I'm not sure about tools specifically. So I think it depends on your approach. Like some people might want a more like clear demarcation between the old and the new, and so might want to introduce, let's say, a parameter store to put some output from my old stack, and then I'm going to consume that in my new one. But there are also CDK convenience methods to say I want to grab a template or part of a template and reuse that. So that could be something worth looking at to say, I want all my resources the same. This will give me that. until I can work through the process of actually, and give me like the new way of deploying it, but give me that consistency with what I've got today. So that could be worth a look as well. Yeah, I'm happy to point you at those as well if that's interesting. Aidan, sorry.
Yeah, just with the aspects, how you've got the, you showed them being used both for validation and for mutation as well.
Yeah.
Do you see much usage of them for mutation at all, or like what sort of cases do you see the mutation side of it being used in?
Yeah, I mean, I think like changing something under someone's feet is a little bit of a dicey game to play, and that's maybe the angle you're talking about. Like it could introduce more problems than it solves, in the sense that you're changing the state on the way out the door. I probably would advise against that. I'd probably like look for the erroring out and giving that feedback. Tags. Tags is one where you might. So if you wanted to enforce a tagging scheme, you could apply tags based on stuff and have that logic applied consistently without having to think about it. That could be something where you might want to use that. And it's not kind of likely going to critically change the infrastructure. Likely, yeah.
Just more of an observation. So I like the idea of your superpowers. So you touched on the JSII thing. And obviously, if you've got a community of developers that are using different languages, that's great. But I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that if you're a developer of a construct level, a layer 3 construct library,
Yep.
so this is what we do in Curtin,
Yep.
you only need to develop it in TypeScript.
Yep.
And then your other teams that are using Python or
Yep.
whatever,
Can consume the same.
just consume that.
Yep.
It's worth calling out.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of not exactly what you were saying, but I think a point that I maybe didn't make is that, in much the same way as you can benefit from all the like software development world that we're bringing in this approach, like that can also be a source of risk, I guess, in a sense. Like if your team is not au fait with software development and how to go about that, then, people are given more leeway to be creative about how they implement things and potentially could create, maintenance issues and whatnot down the track. So you kind of, it's a bit of a twin-edged sword. You get this power, but you kind of need to use it responsibly. Whereas CloudFormation, it's like fairly, flat. So where you put code and how you sort of work through that, there's a lot more variance, I think, in a CDK project. Yeah. Does that make sense? And not really strictly related to what you were saying, which I think is a good superpower that I didn't
I
highlight.
think the other thing is project simplifies the whole JSII configuration.
Yeah,
So
cool.
It's worth considering as you get going down that line.
Awesome.
Thanks for your questions, everyone. I'm sorry, I think we might have to call it there.
I'll be around for a while. Yeah.
We'll be around for a little while, or hit Slack, or meet up. We'll look at that afterwards. Please join me in thanking Jack.
Thanks for bearing with me during my awkward silences. So, just proves it's real, I guess. Yeah.
It was look, I actually think there's a lot more that we could do around CDK in this group. I think some examples of actual reuse of using these frameworks to build a library would be excellent to see. So if anybody's feeling productive or inspired to do that, talk to us. We can help you out with creating some content. Did you want to throw that slide up on the... Just while that's happening, does anyone have any sort of community news, notices about upcoming events or...
Is item
day that's coming up right here? James, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, look. So AWS has just recently started promoting this upcoming Cloud Day. I don't know that it's happened before, but they're running it in cities, bigger cities that don't get summits, basically. So Perth's lucky to get one. I think Auckland had one last week. July 26th, you can jump on here, register for free. There's a couple of different tracks there around innovation, modernisation and so forth. So check out the sessions, and it's down at Perth Convention Centre. So and a full day of content. So check that out at the back end of next month.
Anything more to add to that, Jen?
No, that's perfect, thank you.
No worries. So our next event, July Meetup, building immersive 3D digital twins with AWS IoT Twin Maker. It's going to be something different and it's going to be really interesting. I'm not going to be here, I'll be overseas, but I will watch it on YouTube, yeah, absolutely. Or possibly on the stream, depending on the time zone. Yeah, so please join us. Greg Beagle has got a lot to say on the matter, so please join us there. If there's nothing else, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Good night.